As Louis said, my name is Dasgupta. I lead the Ross Center, which is an institute in WRI, which is an environmental organization, but I and my team work in cities. So my point of departure is not actually water, it's cities. How cities will succeed, and how water supply to people in cities is such a critical part. And it's really at a very stressful moment for cities as they're growing across the world. And the point I'm going to make is the series of research work we're doing about how cities, in particular in Global South, which I think are the cities that are stressed more, they're the least capacity, least amount of money per capita, and they're growing the fastest. What is the way we as a community can figure out that they can be successful? So that is the piece of work we're working on. We're about to publish a paper on water, and from that perspective, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to share with you our thinking, our initial finding, what we're going to publish, and to get a feedback from you where we are. So that's what I'm going to run through my presentation as fast as I can in the 15 minutes we have. One of the big things that happened in the world, I think, is last month, a report published by IPCC called 1.5 degrees, basically a report that's saying how can we get to a 1.5 degree world, higher than temperature, rise in temperature, which basically what people believe is the threshold by which very bad things will start happening beyond that. And it says many very important things. One of the very most important things is we need really systematic changes. Systematic changes in many things, how we live, how we consume. It talked about energy, but it talked about cities, how cities in the world where most people, 3.5 billion people live in cities, most people in the world live in cities, 2.5 billion more people will live in cities in the next 35 years, how that city as a system needs to change. And the reason this is because of this. The report says 5.7 billion, this is out of 9 billion people in 2050, they'll be likely to face water scarcity at least once, 1 month every year. It's not just water, it's also cities will be hotter. And as you can see, 350 million people in this report that pointed out. This is the context of climate change, how it affects water supply. And this is from Aqueduct, a piece of work our organization does on water research. This is a baseline stress of where the water stress is and going to be, as you can figure out where basically scarcity of water will be. Now, you will think if this is the map everyone's looking at, this is publicly available, we should not be living there, right? We should live somewhere else where there is water. That, unfortunately, is not the case. Where cities are, this is a map of where cities will grow from now till 2030. The green parts are the cities that will grow the fastest. As you can imagine, they are in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. That's where in the map before I showed where a lot of the water, so there's a lot of overlap with high level of water scarcity and where cities will grow, where human population will live in their future. This urbanization, so the first point is climate change actually creates a very scarce water as a commodity. Second, we are moving into cities. Cities are growing in places of scarcity. The third point, this is not in the future. This is happening today. These are headlines from newspapers across the world, from BBC, where 11 cities are elected to, in Rio, in Brazil, in Mexico City, in Bangalore. These are world's biggest cities. A lot of GDP in the world get created in these cities. They're actually today water scarce. This is going to only increase. This is a very interesting chart. I don't know if you can see it from there. One city. I wanted to make the simple point. The blue tall line is the water available in the cities of Algiers. And today, in 2010, you can see the city supply and what the demand is. This chart is simply showing, as we go to 2030, the demand for water from other sources, which is the source of industry, will actually increase. The supply, city supply will decrease, and demand from cities because of population and industry will increase. This doesn't even take into account reduction in the quantity of water. The last point, many people before talked about data before me in the panel, not just before, 2 panels before that. And as you know, the world celebrated in 2015 that we have made most of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and then we started the SDGs. And water was one of them that was claimed that we have met the goal. As you can see, 91% coverage, or almost met the goal. 88% was the goal. And in this chart, the very interesting part is the light blue part, which is called improved. And when we investigated this improved part, which is pipe water to dwelling, public taps, a lot of other things which is not pipe water to your home, there was a vast difference in quality of that and also the contamination of water. So one point when we dug into this data set with other researchers, this data set we think is overestimated vastly about the actual not only quantity, but quality of water people are getting. So this is the third thing that we think this has resulted, all these three things I think combined has resulted that between 1990 and 2015, actually the percent of people in cities who have receiving pipe water actually declined. So the MDGs, if you look at, actually will tell you, which is an aggregated data set globally, that this has been a fantastic 15 years, but in actual real terms, number of people who are receiving, the percentage of people receiving pipe water has declined. These are numbers from UNICEF, 41% of urban population of the least developed, and the population I'm talking about have pipe water, and 47% have safely managed water. These are different distinctions of the UN system. Basically, people in cities, because more people live there and because more poor people live there, water supply actually is not improving, which if you just looked at the MDGs or the globally understanding of the topic, you would not think this is what the situation. You think we are doing very well. Actually, it doesn't seem to us, looking at the data, we are doing well. So we think, just to summarize, this is just the backdrop of our research. Three things are happening that are actually creating the stress in cities. One, of course, the climate-related stresses, which we did not actually talk about that much in the last few panels, which is increasing for changing rainfall patterns, changing location timing, heat. Then the inadequacy of infrastructure that is there in the global south, and the continuous increase of population is creating a situation in cities that is making it actually worse for whole cities, but also especially for poor people in cities. The point I want to make is that we always kind of end up saying, oh, this is about a problem for the poor in the cities. Hey, yeah, it is, but it's actually not just a problem for the poor in the city. It's a problem for the city. This is a picture of Jakarta, where the water scarcity is forcing people to pump water, subterranean water, where the city is actually sinking, which has multiple consequences. One is the seawater is rising in that area, and city sinking makes it very dangerous for one of the largest cities in the world. And there's a very big financial implication. The $260 billion per year is a UNICEF number that was quoted actually by someone else, our colleagues from OECD, which is the total cost of, not total economic cost of water, not getting provided water and sanitation. And in the just extraction itself is a 1 to 2% GDP loss. The simple point is this stresses is not just stresses for the urban poor, it actually affects the city as a whole. So one question is, how do you make water more resilient, or water system? This is even before getting into city, the water availability in the city. One is, of course, information. So we know better. I pointed out the problem of microdata. The second is collaboration. It's clear to us that these water situations in cities cannot be solved at the city level itself. It has to be solved at a governance level that's higher, maybe region, whatever the watershed is, with collaboration across different layers of government. This is easy said than done, especially in the global south, where most of our work is. Innovation. Many people talked about innovation needed in supply, data, in figuring out using less water in system, conservation systems, and reusing water. And finally, finance. These design and finance have been discussed before, so I will not actually dwell on it, but these things together make up, I think, the beginning of a resilient system. One word about information. My organization, WRI, spends a lot of energy and time in making information as detailed as possible available to everyone in the world. We think if you flood the world with information to all the actors, better decisions can be made. And there are multiple products these are all available. You can Google it in your phone. One is Aqueduct. This is every watershed in the world is mapped, and that's where I got the data from, the scarcity of water in cities. One is Flood Analyzer of flooding opportunities. This is done collaboration with a Dutch firm, and the Global Forest Watch, where forests are and how water and forests are. These are just few of the tools. We have a kind of one tool which is Research Watch. Simple point I'm making, information will be critical for multi-layer government, and we have done so. So have many other organizations in the world. Now, talking about data, I pointed out that how the MDG data were really scarce. So our research, we started saying if the data is not right, how can we get better data? So we actually went to these 15 cities across the world, as you can see them. And we did studies in each city about water availability. What exactly today, how are people getting drinking water overall in the city and in one or two poorer communities? Like, what is the real situation? Because we are very convinced the macro global data does not tell us a picture that you think it should tell us. This Towards a More Equal City is the name of the overall research work that we are doing. What we found, and this is surprising because these are not the world's just the poorest cities in the world. These are cities across the world. That 60% of the household in these cities, and of the sub-Saharan Africa, did not receive piped water. 25% and this received other ways of getting water. I will come back to this intermediary solution, which is the 25%. And people who got the intermediary solution, which is not piped water, they often pay 30 times more than the piped water. So these solutions are connected with the affordability of the population. And the 12 of the 15 cities that even had portion of the city that was piped that did not have 24-hour supply. They were intermittent from sometimes 2 hours, sometimes some hours in weeks and things like that. So this is the picture from these are not richest cities in the world. So you saw which cities are, but this is the picture which is quite different from the macro data. From this, we arrived at few observations that I'd like to share, which are contrary to the traditional understanding. The first one, the traditional approach. I used to work for the World Bank for many years, and the approach was that water, and it still is, lots of it, is an economic good. So water has a price because it's a scarce good, and if you price it properly, if you treat it as economic good, that's the best way to get to a solution to get to everyone water. We'll price it, we'll actually value it. And this led to, from the 80s, 90s, a vast array of PPPs for water. Very few of them in the global south actually work. Corporatization of the utilities so that it'll work like private entities, though publicly owned. These are the two observations we have from all the 15 cities. One, these two efforts of private involvement, and again, this is not about not involving private. Everyone has said before me, private funds are needed to actually fix the infrastructure gap we have. So I'm not debating against that. The point of these privatization and corporatization, at least in the cities we worked, studied, did not successfully reach the poor. For many reasons. Few of the reasons were private entities were not keen to reach the poor, and anywhere that we want to reach the poor needed a parallel subsidy structure to help to meet the goals of the private entities, which was not in place. And in the most cities, actually all 15 cities, what we did, affordability, which is 5% of income according to the UN, the cubic meter of clean water to produce in that city did not actually meet the 5% goal in those cities, which means simply to get clean water in these poor households, there has to be some kind of a subsidy measure, whether it's publicly done, privately, or otherwise. So that was one observation, so we came to the conclusion this needs much better public policy intervention. Just actually setting up the market infrastructure would not actually solve this. The second, these two observations of actually many cities not getting water and the pricing not right to get to the poor made us look at two things. One, concluding is the water has to be looked at as system, both system at a regional level, but system inside a city across sectors. Just looking at water itself will be very difficult. And right now in the paper, we've argued at a city level 4 things that we think should be evaluated and looked at. And I want to share them with you. I would love to hear your reaction. One is piped water. We found in our work that piped water, where it was there, was the cheapest for the families and also the highest quality. And we have some examples where this has been done. And we try to calculate, okay, if everyone wants to get, we say we should try to get everyone pipe water, and you will say, that's impossible. The reason it hasn't happened because we don't have money for it. It's very expensive. Actually, the number that's not a number from us. That's a number actually calculated by the World Bank and UN. Is $141 billion to get that is not a very large number for the world. So other people have talked about before that water, that there's this kind of always discussion, there's not enough money. I'm not convinced that is the problem, that there's not enough money. It's not in the right places, and it doesn't have the right business model, maybe. But 141. So one of the conclusions is, wherever possible, we have to focus on prioritizing extending pipe water. Why do I say this? Why is this different? Because there is actually in the world a lot of intermediate solutions going on. Intermediate solution of kiosks, which are cheaper in the short run. Your tanker, I can list them. Our finding is those intermediate solution does reach water to those, but the quality of water and the cost of the healthcare that goes with it actually doesn't produce a cheaper solution. So this life cycle costing of water, if you did, again, I'm repeating, these are from the 15. I don't know what will happen if you studied all 5,000 cities. But our belief is that from our work on cities, this is where we should focus the public policy on. You can't talk about water. There were a lot of people before me on regulation who know water much better without talking about water supply quality and intermittent. This came up in every city we worked in. And intermittent service and losses, intermittent service that produces the lower quality water. But some of the cities actually have tried to figure out a way to go beyond it. In Bangalore, they've tried to plan this disruption so people have information. In India, in Next Drop provides. So people have tried to solve this intermittency by providing data. But this is a problem water engineers have been working on for many, many years to solve. All my colleagues in the World Bank focused on this. Every project did in water focused on this. This is a problem that actually I think we have done better, but it still remains in every city we study. The third point is actually to get water access to the poor, the economic cost of not getting water to the poor, as I pointed out, is enormous. There has to be some kind of a subsidization. Now, what we find in the world, in the study across the world, there has been a lot of innovation how to pinpoint the subsidization, how to get to the right family at the right time. And I don't want to go through all of them, but we feel that is required, but public policy focus needs to be what are we learning from the world in the different things people have done. Mean tested subsidies, free basic water, in Durban, which has been controversial. I forget first 9-10 cubic meters of water is free, then the block tariff changes. But cities have experimented in many ways to actually make water cheaper for family. This is a critical piece for public policy that needs to be focused on. Our understanding is by not actually focusing, it will be very difficult to provide clean water to all families. And finally, 35 to 40% of people in the global south, all the green areas I showed you in that map before, live in informal settlements with many different basic services not working. So one of the things that we propose here is not only just looking at water supply, but looking at upgrading and making those major parts of cities in some places. The reason I pause in this is it's not just a water supply solution. It's a solution of area development with water supply and sanitation being a core part of it, but also access on roads. And this requires, doing this successfully requires multiple departments and cities to work together, which historically has been very difficult to do. And this kind of a cross-sectoral approach, we think, has a huge potential to look at. Finally, just to conclude, I want to say our finding is that as we move forward, water will become more and more a scarce commodity for cities and other users. Scarcity of any commodity produces much more stresses to the poor families. We need to take a much different public policy view towards water. And the two things I want to point out is the coordination regionally, not just inside cities, how water is actually available to cities, and coordination inside cities. And the public policy intervention that is required to make water available across to the poor people are critical to make water access, because the economic cost of not doing so is truly enormous. Thank you. Thank you for listening.